All right. Um, Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Books and Beyond event. I'm your host, Pinky Shah, to get tonight's event started with my co-host, Sabina. We have question answer session planned for later, so feel free to raise your hand or type your question in the chat. Just as a reminder, we'll be recording tonight's event. So tonight we are joined by award-winning author of Lion Woman of Tehran, an instant national bestseller, The Stationery Shop, a national and international bestseller, and Together Tea, a Massachusetts Book Award finalist, Marjan Kamali. Marjan's novels are published and translated more than in 25 languages. We are so thrilled to have her tonight with us. Welcome, Marjan, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, Pinky. It's a joy to join you tonight.
Yeah, no, we are very excited. And first and foremost, actually, I wanted to extend my congratulations on the remarkable success of Lion Woman of Tehran. Because when I picked your book, we like to pick a book that's like 8 to 9 months old, so it's easier for us to get multiple copies from other libraries. So I was like, okay, I should not have an issue. This is 2024 July published book, and we are meeting in May, so we should be okay. Um, but your book is so popular and so loved. We had really very hard time getting copies from other libraries. I reached out to all the libraries in Connecticut and they said all the copies are checked out and we have a long wait list. So we ended up buying multiple copies for our library because it's nice for readers to read a book before they, come to the discussion. But Sabina was able to purchase multiple books for our library, and people were able to read. And we were kind of very enforcing, please bring the book back so more people can read. And it's such a lovely read, and definitely it stayed with me. So before even we dive into the question, would you be kind enough to read a paragraph from your book for our readers?
Yes, I will. I usually read from either the beginning or a scene from the very middle of the book. But given that I'm only reading about a paragraph, I thought I would read from the end, and you won't get spoilers because if you haven't read the book, you don't know who is speaking. So, now, with the protests after Massa's death and the country recoiling in grief, I feel the rage continuously. I feel it in every limb of my body, in every millimeter of my blood. Let them beat me with their batons, let them bruise my body to a pulp, let them shoot and kill me. For a lifetime we have fought. We have fought and fought and fought. We want to be free, we want to be equal, we want to be able to live our lives. I recently read a theory about ocean waves. This theory says that while to our eyes waves appear suddenly on the shore, their abruptness is an illusion. Waves begin their journey thousands of miles out at sea. They accumulated shape and power from winds and undersea currents for ages. And so when you see the women screaming in Iran for their rights, please remember that the force and fury of our screams have been gathering power for years. Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. So I always like to start my, question answer with the first question, like just to so readers get to know you a little bit more than what's written on your cover of your book. So if you can just share a journey of how you became a writer and just inspiration behind the whole this novel, how you picked this topic to write this book.
Yes, I mean, I guess like most writers, I loved to read, so I was always reading, and I harbored this desire to be a writer ever since I was a child, but it didn't seem like a vocation that was really available to me. I was encouraged to pursue professions that were more financially secure and just stable in general. So, Pinky, I'm sure the very common refrain that's true for so many people
Yeah.
whose parents are immigrants, like doctor, lawyer, engineer. Um, and then I I came to be a writer mostly because my teachers encouraged me so kindly, so deeply, so passionately. They helped chart my course.
Hmm.
It still took quite some time. My first book was published when I was 42, Together Tea. And then my second book, The Stationery Shop, was published 6 years later. And The Stationery Shop really changed my career
Hmm.
because that book took off. It became a national bestseller and it has since been translated. That book alone has been translated into 23 languages. And it's about first love, it's about lost love. And I think that's a theme that so many people across the world can
Hmm.
identify with.
Yeah.
And so I was writing the next book after The Stationery Shop, and it was about four moms in suburbia whose firstborns were going off to college. But then the pandemic started, and we were in this time of very strange uncertainty. And I was on Instagram and I was looking at posts, and I saw posts from a friend of mine who had been my best friend when I was a child in Iran in the fourth grade. And
Hmm.
just seeing her face again and seeing um, what she's up to now. I mean, now she works for a human rights organization in Iran, and I'm an author in America. And I kept thinking how once upon a time we shared everything. We played together almost every day. We did our homework together. We knew so much about each other's lives. And now, obviously, we've gone in these different directions, but her influence on me remains. She helped
Hmm.
shape me. And I kept thinking how these friends we make when we're very young are very formative to who we later become. And I knew what I really wanted to write was the story of a broken friendship. So I put away that other book and I started to write The Lion Women of Tehran.
I'm glad that you did. And the one thing that you mentioned about the young age friendship, I always makes me think that when we are young and the friendship bonds that we create, they are free from all the biases. We just, if you click with that person, you're just friends. You don't think about the social equality or how much money they make or which kind of family, what race they are from. And I feel like they are the purest of the purest friendship, because you're not looking to get anything back, but just to be in each other's company and enjoy them. So I thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyed the relationship between Ellie and Hama, uh, who are your main characters, which leads to my next question. That there are two individuals very contrasting in personalities, and what they want from their life,
Mm.
but they have such a profound connection that over the decades it just remains. The distance between the countries has no effect on that. So did you, Ellie and Hamam, are is kind of based on what you just shared with us?
It's not like I'm Ellie and my friend was Homa or vice versa. I made up Ellie and Homa. They're their own people. They have their own backstories, their own backgrounds that have nothing to do with my own, background. But what is true is the feeling between them, the feeling of friendship. So I love what Emma Straub once said. She said, in fiction, even when we make up everything, we make up the characters or the circumstances, oftentimes the feelings are true. So the feelings are certainly true. But Ellie and Homa are not my friend and me. However, I did make them both born the year my mother was born. I deliberately made them born in 1943 because I wanted to show how, as they grow up, the country changes, and I wanted to show how their girlhood in the 40s, the world keeps opening up for them in the 50s and 60s as they come of age. Women gain more and more rights in the country where they're living, and in the 70s. And then at the end of the 70s, they lose those rights. So I wanted to have the arc of their lives mirror the arc of women's rights in Iran so that we see the gains and then the losses.
Right.
And I love what you said about how when we're very young, those friendships are so pure because children don't necessarily think about status or social standing. And Ellie and Homa don't, but Ellie's mother does. And I made Ellie come from a more privileged background and Homa come from a poorer background. Though I would argue, and people who've read the book would argue that she has the richer life at home with her
Right.
family. Yeah.
Right, right, right. And you kind of just said that you chose 1943 for them to be born, and your novel actually, set in 50s Iran, a time where girls actually attended school and they aspired to become judges like Hama and advocate for women's right, only to witness those rights being systematically stripped away.
Hmm.
How challenging was it for you to immerse yourself in this part of the history and the situation that the country is going through to portray uh, that experience through your writing? Because while I was reading, it was actually very unsettling to read, and the truth is always more unsettling than fiction because that's happening. And that's exactly how it made me feel. So when you were writing, you were again reliving the,
Hmm.
the history. So how challenging was it for you to go through that?
Oh, it was really challenging. First of all, I had to educate myself so much about mid 20th century in Iran. I had to learn about the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and I did a lot of research, as most writers do. I read a lot of books, but I also had the privilege of talking to people who had lived during that time. And I talked a lot to my mother. So Ellie and Homa are born when she's born. They also go to her high school, her exact same high school. So I could ask her, hey, what did your uniform look like? Or where did you go for lunch? What would you have for lunch? Cafe Andre, all of that is real. As far as, experiencing those highs and those lows, it it takes you on quite a journey. You experience the trauma with the characters. You also experience the healing. Maybe that's why I always, in all three of my books, the characters do experience some trauma, but they also experience healing. Maybe I need that myself as the writer, having gone through it with them. And Homa wants to be a judge. She really does. And she has these goals. And then later, after the revolution, women judges are defrocked. I mean, the girls were able to go to school even after the revolution. So that remained, and that was a fight. And that was something they won. And so in Iran, from, way back in the earlier 20th century, well, not way back, probably 20s, 30s, always the girls did go to school. It's just that after the revolution, they segregated the schools and,
Mhm.
they were single gender, but also they changed some of the professions that women could pursue. And we see how Homa's dreams fall apart, both for personal reasons and also for societal reasons.
And that's actually leads to me our next question. Like Hama's life underwent a significant change following her arrest, which adversely affected her friendship with Ellie. But however, in time, Hama was able to forgive her. What do you believe that contributed to her decision to extend their forgiveness?
Homa's ability to forgive is an ability that I think is rare. I don't know if I would have forgiven Ellie, and I feel most people probably wouldn't have, but I wanted to create a character who is an exceptional person, that rare person who walks amongst us, who's almost like at a higher level, higher plane of character, right? She's not wealthy, she doesn't have privileges, but just in her traits as a human being, she's at the highest level. She's achieved that tip top of the pyramid of, self-actualization. And so I think what allows Homa to forgive Ellie is that for her, she even says, Ellie, when Ellie can't believe it, and she says, why? And she says, because you are my friend. She has this simplicity about the way she looks at things, and she truly believes in her heart that Ellie's her friend, and therefore she will forgive Ellie. Perhaps in the earlier years she couldn't do it, and there's some scenes where we see it's a bit more complicated. But I think Homa is a very sort of cooked person in that, she's emotionally mature. I feel like she's emotionally very mature and she's able to do these things. And part of it is perhaps because of what she's been through. She's been through so much. But also, she's had the privilege that I think is the biggest privilege on earth. She had really good parents. She had really good parents. And maybe in that way, they set her up to be the way she is, to be this forgiving.
And lot of throughout their teenage years, Hamas and Ellie's and their school life, like to even portray all those incidents and what's happening. Did you come across any stories? Did you hear from your mom or come across in your research? How did you?
I did, I came across stories. It's almost like a weaving of things I make up with my imagination, things that I've heard, things that truly happened to family members of mine. And it's weaving the all of that together to create this world, these people. So, for example, I have an aunt who was arrested when she was 20 years old for being a communist.
Mhm.
Under the Shah's regime, she was arrested and she went to prison. Now, the details of what happened to Homa did not, fortunately, happen to her, but she was a 20-year-old university student who was arrested for being a communist during the Shah's time. That's something that's always stayed with me. That's something that happened, quite frequently back then. And so I wanted to sort of explore that because when you are a child and you hear these stories about family members, that purity that you were talking about earlier with the friendship, there's a part of you that thinks, wait, my aunt spent a few years in prison. What was that like? She was 20 years old. What was that like? Why, for being politically active, she was in prison? How could that have felt? And as a writer, you get to explore through your imagination the answers to these questions. So some of these things happened in real life and some I made up, but every single political event, every single law I mentioned, every single protest, every single societal sort of seismic shift, all of those are real. All of those are real. So I am not making up a single protest. The Women's Day March in 1978 or 9, March 8th, 1979, that's a scene in the book where thousands of women are marching in the streets of Tehran, and Homa is one of them, and her daughter. That was real. That was real. I even got some of the quotes that the reporters made from a New York Times article about that day. So that's the part that I enjoy a lot, knowing that all the political events that I write about are real.
These are definitely special people. It takes a certain type of special person to do beyond, think beyond themselves. And uh, that's for me, that's I cannot do that. I'm not, even though I think that's for me, that's bravery in a whole different level because it's to put not think about yourself, what's going to happen to you. And if something happens to you, your family also suffers. To do not think about anything else and just focused on one mission and do that. Because the country I come from, we have the whole independence fight with British and all that. And I always think about the people who fought for our country, like these are special people. That was a whole different kind of generation that you're talking about. And it just gives me chills to think about these kind of people. Like you said, when you heard about your aunt, like that they exist, and knowing somebody who actually, did that, yeah, it's very lucky to know somebody who were part of that special history. Um,
Yeah, they do exist. And it's fascinating because if they didn't exist, so many of us wouldn't be able to enjoy the privileges we have today. I feel that if I were in the position that Ellie and Homa were in at the time, at that place, I probably would not have made some of the choices Homa made. I would have been too scared. I wouldn't have wanted to sacrifice my own relationship with my daughter or my ability to be with my family. But were it not for women like that, we wouldn't have the progress we have had. And so women like Homa exist, women like the people who fought for independence that you're mentioning exist. And we're so lucky they exist. And it takes this kind of bravery um, to make the changes, And I feel like Homa has to make such difficult choices. And I don't always agree with her choices. Not all readers agree with her choices. But there are prisons filled with women like Homa in Iran right now. And it's their fight that has allowed the progress that we do have to exist.
Yeah, yeah. And I agree, but I feel like we give a tag of difficult choices because it's difficult for us. I feel like these people are so clear in their priorities. It
So true. So
they
true.
they just make they are very clear what their focus is, what they want to do, and that's it. So if we ask them, if we ever get a chance to talk to any of these people, they were like, no, it's very simple. So I feel like we give them difficult because it's difficult for us. I
Yeah.
think it's very simple for them. Otherwise, they won't be doing it. They're
I
very
think,
clear.
yeah, you make such a good point. It's along the lines of what we were saying earlier about how Homa is able to forgive Ellie. For her, it's simple. For
Simple.
her, it's you're my friend. I forgive you. You are my friend. Of course, I forgive you. Whereas for us, it's like, how could she? This is such repercussions. And so it's true what you say, even with the choices that Homa has to make. You make a very good point. They're difficult for us because we would sit there thinking, should I do this? Should I do that? But she has this crystal clear sort of North Star. She wants to fight. She has to fight. She knows if she doesn't fight, nothing will happen. So she makes that choice. Yeah.
Yeah. And also another thing that absolutely stood out to me is the strong male characters, such
Mm.
as Hamas' father. That was a foundation for her, for Hama. Like you said, she had a strong family. Abdul, Merdad, these are all, in my eyes, very special, strong male character, and they play significant roles at various stages in Hamas' life. How essential was it for you to incorporate these impactful, like male figures into your novel?
It was really essential for me because I come from a background where the men are very often vilified. And Middle Eastern men are so often drawn with a very broad brush, where they are the evil ones, right? And the women are these poor, oppressed things. And I grew up with media images of sort of these fanatic terrorist types who were just so distasteful. And do they exist? Of course they do. Sadly, they do. And they exist in my books too. but I also wanted to show the rest of the men, what we hope are the majority, the men who are standing side by side with the women in these protests, the men who marched in the streets as recently as, the latest movement in 22, the men who love their wives, the men who want their daughters to be educated, the men who hate this sort of oppression that's being um, forced down people's throats. And so Mehrdad, yes, he's a great guy, isn't he? And Abdul turns out to be a great guy. And it was really important just for me personally to write Abdul that way as well, because Mehrdad being part of the middle class, upper middle class, well-educated, progressive men, that's the kind of man that I know very well just from real life. That's the kind of Iranian man that maybe people would expect to be the good guy. But Abdul was harder for me to write because he comes from a conservative background. He comes from a more religious background. He comes from a background that belongs to the people who the sort of progressives would think of as sort of the deplorables, right? So it was harder for me to write him and to do right by him, but I wanted to. I wanted to because I didn't want it to just be the sort of educated upper middle class men who are the good guys. I also wanted to show how this one man from a very, very religious, what in Iran they would have, other people in Iran would have called backwards part of society, how he ended up doing the right thing.
Was that ever a, a debate in your head to keep Abdul in Hamas life, or have
Oh, yes, it was such a debate, to be honest with you. So much of it was a debate. The entire book was basically a puzzle that I had to figure out. And was Abdul going to do the right thing? And then, I don't know how much spoilers we can share, but was he going to remain in Homa's life, as you say so diplomatically? I did think about that. And then I had to make some hard choices for me as the writer to let some people go, and, some people met their fate. So all of it was up for debate. And that's the part of the writing process that I find to be the most exciting and the most difficult because you're constantly problem solving. Because I don't know what's going to happen, you see, when I'm writing the book. And so I have to figure it out. And I want to figure out the best possible book for the reader. So, yeah, there's some very tough, tough choices to make.
in past, because I've been talking to various authors in past few years, and multiple authors have said that after some times the characters are alive in their head and they actually take over the story. So it's not like now the writer is writing them, the characters are just living the life and you're just putting the words on the paper. How much was true for you?
Very true, especially when it came to Homa. She wrote herself, as she would, right? With Ellie and some of the other characters, I felt I had to nudge them a bit, and I had to sort of be the steward and make some decisions. Homa made every decision by herself. She wrote herself. She wrote herself into problems. She wrote herself out of problems. She spoke herself. But that being said, all of them, all of the characters are living, real people for me. They are absolutely real. I feel I know them better than I know real people in my life, to be quite honest with you. And I think about them sometimes more than real people in my life, or I want to think about them more. Um, they're so real to me, and they have their own lives and their own fears and their own joys and their own messes. And yeah, they really become a part of you.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. And I can only imagine. I read a book and it takes me, what, 2 to 3 weeks, and I think about them. I can only imagine how much they live in your head and they are how real they are to you, because you kind of gave birth to them and you kind of they grew up with you. So they're absolutely part of your life forever.
Yes,
So yeah.
very much
Mm.
so.
Yeah. Um, Another thing, like throughout her life, Ellie's mom, a little bit you kind of mentioned in the earlier sentence, like Ellie's mother disapproved their friendship, Ellie and Hamas, often claiming that she wants what you have.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she kept bringing evil eye, superstition in the, conversation. However, in a surprising turns of event, it was Hama who ultimately provided Ellie with the opportunity to embrace the motherhood by allowing her to help Bahar
Yes.
to start
Yeah.
a new life in America. It's such a, way of life to, play by, on its own. And so, how did you come up with this whole plot?
Oh, so much thinking, so much walking in the woods, praying. It just unfolded as I wrote. Some of it I didn't know until almost the end of the first draft. It was just a lot of figuring it out. I did like the idea of ultimately Homa gives Ellie the biggest gift, what
Mhm.
she cannot have. There's no way she can have it, right? She has tried and tried. And then it's as though it falls into her lap from Homa. And it's very selfless in a way of Homa. And also she just has to do what she has to do, and she has her own reasons. It's also, Ellie is helping Homa. But um yes, I don't know. It's just it truly is in the very beginning of the book. It's like you you have this vision of what the story should be, and then as you write and as the characters develop, it's like the threads start to create a pattern, and then the pattern emerges, and the more you write, the more you see. And then there's nothing like that aha moment where you think, oh my goodness, Homa should maybe then have her daughter be sent to America. You just come up with those. There's nothing quite like it. And when it doesn't happen, it's horrible.
The one thing that, like, I actually chuckled when I read the way you made Ellie describe motherhood in one simple sentence. She said, "Is this what motherhood is like, to worry about your child 24/7?" I was like, "Oh my God, how it can be more truer."
I know what sentence you mean. Yes, that one came from the heart because
You
she has
know?
no idea, right? And then suddenly it's befallen upon her to be this mother, and then she's like, "Wait a minute, is this what it is?" Like, oh, never a moment's peace.
I think that I think she thinks like that when she has to worry about the prom. I don't know exactly, but I remember her specifically she said, "Is this what motherhood is about? That you
Yeah,
just worry about your child 24/7?"
yeah.
So very simply put, did you particularly have any any particular character was challenging for you to write, and do you have your
Mhm.
favorite?
Oh, it was hard for me to figure out Ellie's mother because initially when I wrote her, she was this archetype of the sort of narcissistic parent, a mother who is very self-centered, who sees the world through her lens, who sees the child as an extension of herself and therefore a reflection of herself and means really good things for the kid, but also because of how it affects her, how it affects her status.
Mhm, mhm.
And so that's initially how she was. And then it wasn't until much later in the writing process that I was encouraged by my editor to have a resolution scene with the mother.
Mhm.
And I thought, my gosh, that's going to be really hard to write because how do you have a resolution with a person like that? But the beauty of fiction, as opposed to real life, is that you do get to have resolution scenes and you do get to write them out. And you do get to have characters say things that they wish they had said their entire lives. And in that scene, in, of all places, Bloomingdale's, in the frozen, they're having frozen
Doesn't
yogurt.
matter.
Yes. Um, Ellie finally gets to say to her mom, why couldn't you just be happy for me? I had this friend, and then the mother's like, well, I never liked her. And then Ellie says, but I liked her. She mattered to me. And so they get to have this heart and heart. And then Ellie's mother says something that makes Ellie think of her mother in a different way forevermore.
I felt like that kind of gave Ellie closure to know about their relationship as a couple and why her mother behaved the way she did.
Yes.
By her mother sharing about her Ellie's dad, and I felt like that. I think that was very important. The resolution chapter was very important, just for Ellie to have closure. And like you said, it definitely made her see her mother in a different light. It's kind of like lifted the curtain, kind of thing.
Yes, yes. And it kind of helped her pop that bubble that, she'd been carrying this weight of why is my mother like this? Why did she not ever talk about my dad with me? Why couldn't she honor his memory with me? And then it helped explain that to some extent. Yeah.
Um, I just did you I liked in a way how simply like the cafe, and I was hoping, because in the initial somebody gives her the idea and I was like, I hope it turns into the reality, which it does, but it ends up in Boston area, not New York area, because obviously it explains why the job is there and all that stuff. But I did like the very happy, nice ending, and how Hama, like the scene, what they see in the video, YouTube video, Hama. So it like kind of shows everybody what everybody's, doing in their life, and settled in their way with everything, life's not perfect, but it is what you make of it. And that's for me, the ending was just, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Did you have any alternate ending in your mind, or this was kind of what you thought?
I always knew from the very first sentence, I always knew Ellie would end up having a cafe. That I knew. I knew she would end up owning a cafe. And part of the reason I knew that is because in that other book that I was writing, the one I mentioned about the mothers in suburbia, they would, in order to relax, they would go to a place called Miss Ellie's Cafe. And Miss Ellie was this elderly Iranian woman who owned the cafe, but she was just a very minor character in that book, in the book I was writing. And then when I decided to write about friendship, I plucked her out and I gave her this whole friendship story. So in a way, I took Miss Ellie out of Miss Ellie's cafe. So the cafe always existed. And the chapter you just mentioned, where we see the cafe now all these years later, we see Miss Ellie in her element. Hopefully, finally, we see Ellie in her element because we've seen her out of her element for so long and struggling with her insecurities and all of that. But then we see her in her element. So that chapter was one of the first chapters I wrote.
Oh.
And it's the end of the book, but for the longest time in my mind, it was the prologue.
Mm.
But then it became the epilogue.
Yeah.
And I think rightfully so. So I always knew Ellie would end up having a cafe. I always knew Homa would end up fighting. A lot of my readers think Homa's gonna die. They assume she might die, but we see at the end that she's still out there on the streets.
Yeah.
Yes, I did know those things. I did know
I
that.
was I was holding my breath until you mentioned on YouTube that they see her. I was like, thank God she's alive.
That's when you knew, huh? Yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes.
Then you see her, there she is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's so interesting. Yeah, yeah.
Because the life she had chosen, it can go the other way.
Oh, for sure. There was so many reasons why she wouldn't have made it.
Yes, yes.
Yes,
So even
yes.
though I wanted her to be alive, I had my doubts until when they see her on the streets.
Oh, okay. And then you breathed a sigh of relief.
Yes, I sure did.
Oh, good, good. I'm so glad. Yeah.
So, but before I just open it up to our patrons, I just wanted to ask a couple of just questions that are we going to see the future book that you shelved for Four Friend Who Goes to Miss Ellie's Cafe? Or is it going to come back to life, or do you have anything else in making?
That's so interesting because that book I did put it away, but I didn't delete it. And I had over 100 pages. So it would have made sense for my next book to kind of pick up where I left off on that. And Miss Ellie's Cafe is already created, so that part would have been easy. People know Miss Ellie. But as ever, it's not going to be like that because in real life something happened to me after this book came out. After The Lion Women of Tehran came out. Something happened that is so ridiculously magical and strange and mind-boggling that I feel the universe is saying the next book has to be in part based on that. So that's what the next book will be. But maybe one day I'll go back to Miss Ellie's Cafe and to those moms, those poor moms. They've been neglected for quite some time.
Do you have this next project, like you already working on it? Do you have like a future release date, or it's very in early stage?
Very early stages, very early stages. I'm still in that figuring out stage, and I haven't done a ton of writing of it, but a lot of thinking.
Think. Okay, all right. Have you read anything good recently
Hmm.
that you can share with our patrons?
Yes, I have. So I've read, uh, well, I'm still finishing Swift River by S.E. Chambers. I don't know if anybody's read that.
Mhm.
Um, it's a debut novel, and it's set in a Massachusetts small town,
Okay.
and it's about one of the at that time, very few Black girls living in that town, and it's written so well. It's a great story, and I'm truly enjoying that book, Swift River.
Swift River. Okay.
Yeah, highly recommend.
Yep, I wrote it down. All right.
Yeah.
So that's it for me. I would like to now open it up if our patrons have any questions. Guys, do you have any questions to ask? Mrs. Sayre, are you trying to unmute?
I am. No, I just want to say I enjoyed the book tremendously. I just finished it this morning and I bought my own copy. And I'm glad because I can share it now with a lot of friends. But I enjoyed it tremendously. And
Thank you.
I want to ask, how long did you live in Iran?
Oh, that's a great question. Because I've written three novels that take place in both the US and Iran, people assume I grew up there.
Hmm.
But I lived there very little. I only lived there between the ages of 2 and 5,
Oh,
and then again between age 9 and 10 and a half. That's it. That's the only times I lived in Iran. And then I visited twice in my 20s and twice in my 30s.
mhm.
That's it. So I didn't live there very long, but that second segment between 9 and 10 and a half was very pivotal in Iran's history and in my own life because it was after the revolution
Right.
and it was during the first year and a half of the Iran-Iraq War. And it was when all those laws were being changed post-revolution, especially laws regarding women. So I was there for this sort of drastic transition that happened. Yeah, and that's it. That's the only times
Hmm.
I've been there.
Very good. Thank you.
Mhm. Thank you. Barbara, you have a question?
I know I don't have my name there, but it's Barbara. I did something last night. I listened to you for an hour.
Oh my
I
goodness.
listened to another interview. I loved your book and I wanted to get to know you. And you are the most charming person. And the way you present your book, it's wonderful. It was just, I don't know. You know, you brought up some other things, but I remember that you talked about your father was a diplomat.
Yes.
And you moved around to different places. So you've lived in lots of different places. And of course, there's all that talk about food in your book too, you know, and, you know, the special recipes, but also you really talked about, and you talked a little bit about it today too, about your relationship with your mother and how much this book, you know, how you're able to ask her those questions and for her to give you some good information about her life and how that really became part of the story. I mean, it's so wonderful to have your mother, because I think you talked about that your father had passed away a number of years ago, right?
Well, my father passed away right after The Line Women of Tehran came out.
Oh, okay.
Yes, he passed away about 1 month
Oh, he
later.
had passed away. Okay. I know, but your mother's still alive now, right?
My mother's still alive, yes. And
Yes.
for this book, I did ask her a lot about her high school, about all the
Right.
food and all of that. And that was really wonderful to have that as a resource. And with my dad, before he passed away and before he got so sick, I was able to talk to him a great deal about his youth. And the stationery shop, my second book, that book was largely informed by my talking to him. So all the details about 1950s Iran that's in that book, about what people were wearing, what they were eating, the films they were watching at cinema festival, the books in the stationery shop, those are all from conversations with my father. And I'm so grateful, especially now that he's passed away, because I feel like that book is as much his as it is mine. I mean, obviously, I made up the story, I wrote the book, and I made up like the characters and all of that. But those details about that time and that place are from him.
And you had talked about you've talked about how the gentleness of the men in your life.
Yes.
And how that was so how that was so important, you know. Now what kind of a diplomat was your father?
He was a diplomat for Iran, so he worked
He
for
was
the
the diplomat.
Shah. Yes, he worked under the Shah for some time, and then the revolution happened, and then he stayed under the new regime for just a few years, and he retired at a very young age. But my father, you know, his career was very much affected by his disability. He became physically disabled when I was born. So that's a whole other story. But he suffered from an autoimmune disease my whole life. And, you know, that gives you another perspective. Like you were mentioning, Barbara, living in so many countries gives you such a perspective. But being the child of a person living with a disability gives you a whole other perspective. And it's the smallest things. Like I remember being in an elevator not so long ago, and there was a woman in a wheelchair, and she was adjusting her wheelchair, and she kept apologizing to me, and she kept trying to tell me if I could push the buttons. And I felt like, I've got this. This is my life. I lived with this my entire life. And there was no way by looking at me that she could know that I knew some of that world. There's no way she could know that I grew up with a parent who could not walk, you know? So yeah, that also affects you as a person. And I think everything that affects you as a person affects you as a writer.
I can tell you're a very caring person. I mean, I can tell just by your demure and just how you present yourself and how you're so willing to talk so openly and with such clarity about this book. I just loved it, and I love you. So I
Thank
just wanted you to
I
know.
love you. Thank
I
you
just
so
wanted
much.
you to know that. I want
Thank
you to
you.
be, I want you to
I
be my
needed this
friend.
tonight.
Will you
I
be my
appreciate
friend?
it.
No, I'm
I want to
kidding.
be your friend, actually.
Okay.
I appreciate this. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Barbara. And you have
Yeah.
questions?
Yeah,
Go
I had a
ahead.
question too. I loved the book. And as Pinky said, we had trouble getting books into the library, so I listened to it. And I thought the narrators were fantastic. I was curious if you got to help select them.
I did, yes, I got to help select them. So usually what happens with the audiobook is I get sent the way it's worked for all three of my books so far. Like I get sent three finalists and then I select the winner, so to speak.
Mhm.
So with the stationery shop, I got sent three women and I selected Marjan Marno at that time. She was Marjan Marno. And then with that people loved the audio for the stationery shop. So with the Lion Women of Tehran, it was a no-brainer. We asked Marjan to do it again. And she is Ellie. And then this time we have Homa's Voice with Nikki Massoud. So yes, I helped select them. And I personally haven't listened to the whole book because it's a little odd to sit there and listen to your own. It's not, it's like a little
Yeah.
strange, but I've heard wonderful things about how they've read the book. And I know that the people who listen to the audio have been very moved by it. So I'm very grateful to Mojan and to Nikki.
That was wonderful. I listened to the book too. Since
Oh, you did.
yeah, I wanted people to have the book. I didn't want to hug because we didn't have too many copies. So I did the audiobook also and thoroughly enjoyed it. Enjoyed it. Yeah. So
Good.
yeah. Anybody else have any other questions, comments? I guess we're good. This was wonderful.
Oh,
So thank you so much for spending an evening with us and just sharing your thoughts and your journey and your love of writing, everything. And we are very grateful. Thank you so much, Marjan.
thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for this great evening. I felt like I was with kindred spirits. So I really enjoyed our talk and thank you all. And Barbara, we can be friends, FYI. And it's a good problem to have to know that the libraries have so many book on hold. So love knowing that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's very loved book for sure. I can say that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. And all day I kept telling my daughter, I have a Zoom tonight. And then she kept saying, with who? And then I said, the Kent Memorial Library. So all day she's been saying, when is your program with the Kent Memorial Library? So thank you.
Okay.
We were able to
Yes.
mention your name all day long.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a
Take
good
care.
evening. Yeah, bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.